I would choose the book Famine in Somalia, Competing Imperatives, Collective Failures, 2011-2012, by Maxwell and Nisar Majid. This is the book that I would like to recommend. It is possible to give the key message of the book, and it's in a way a very disappointing key message, because it's the key message from ever since. That if you see a crisis looming and you have early warnings, you need to follow by early action. And it's not enough in this particular case. We are inclined to think, okay, Somalia, that is that country that is collapsed and where Al-Shabaab is doing their terrorism. But it is that. But it is as much a failure of the international community that just failed to react on the early signs. So that is the lesson you can learn. But sadly, it's a lesson that has been signaled for the last 20 years. My domain, which is humanitarian aid and reconstruction, doesn't have a lot of reading on diplomacy. Even this book, it's not about diplomacy, but it has many implications for diplomacy on sustainable development, to my mind. Because it's a case study. And I think that is so important for diplomacy, that you actually know that every case is different and that you have to invest in the properties of the case before you do your diplomacy. And these people, they have been working in Somalia for decades. And they really unravel what happened in Somalia. It's theoretically based, but it's really the story, the anatomy of that disaster. That was 2011-2012, where 250,000 people died. You might ask yourself, why a case study? Because if you emphasize that case knowledge is important, that would actually mean that you cannot do anything unless you send in, the anthropologists and everybody, and you cannot do your diplomacy there and then. And that's why I think there should be a middle ground between sort of case-to-case analysis and a kind of general recipe for diplomacy. And that middle ground could be found in scenarios. So you distinguish particular types of crisis, and then you choose a few cases that you study, and by learning from those cases you develop a kind of recipe perhaps, or at least some pointers that you can use in comparable cases. And of course every case is unique, but it makes a difference. So my current research, it is about natural disasters in conflict situations, because nobody knows what to do in those cases when you have a double disaster. And but we don't just look at all the conflicts, but we make categories between high intensity conflict, low intensity conflict, and post conflict. So Somalia would be a high intensity conflict. And then we think we can learn from this for other high-intensity conflicts, maybe like Syria or other places like that. The reason why diplomacy is so important in humanitarian aid is because the realities of aid are also changing very rapidly. Humanitarian aid used to be a very externally driven form of aid, so the troops would come in, do their aid rather on their own in isolation. Whereas today we see that because of the crises are actually increasingly there's a kind of discourse that says people should become resilient, communities should become resilient. But then if communities should become resilient, meaning that they try to take care of their own problems as much as they can, they need space to do it. And that space has to be a policy space to sort of the conditions have to be delivered that they can actually be resilient. And that's what you need a government for. So that's why humanitarian actors today, they have to be diplomats, much more than aid providers, in my opinion.